What would you do if the person you looked down on turned out to be the one who could save everything? Today's story will challenge your heart and keep you watching until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means the world to us. The white pillared mansion on the outskirts of Chicago gleamed like a symbol of success. To the neighbors, it was a palace of wealth, security, and power. But inside, the air often carried a colder weight, the weight of a man who measured the worth of others by the thickness of their wallets. Daniel Walcott was a businessman who had clawed his way into the top tier of Chicago's construction industry. He was known for ruthless decisions, for closing deals without mercy, for treating every interaction as a transaction. That same coldness seeped into his home. And for Ebony Johnson, his live-in maid, it was impossible to ignore. Ebony had been working in the mansion for 2 years. She was 30, strong and steady, a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. But that dignity was tested every single day under Daniel's roof. Born and raised on the South Side, she knew struggle intimately. A sick mother, a younger sister still in school, bills that stacked higher than her weekly paycheck. This job meant survival. And survival meant biting her tongue no matter how sharp the words thrown at her. Daniel never missed an opportunity to remind her of her place. "Ebony, is this how you clean crystal? Look at these streaks." He would tilt a glass toward the light, his lips curling in disgust. "I pay you good money, and this is what I get?" A child could do better. "I'll redo it, sir," Ebony would reply softly, taking the glass back without protest. Other times, he would dismiss her presence entirely, speaking about her as if she weren't in the room. "She's lucky I gave her this job," he once told a business associate while Ebony served them coffee. Most people wouldn't even let someone like her inside their house. The words cut deep, but Ebony's face remained still, her eyes lowered. She'd learned long ago that showing the hurt only gave men like Daniel more power. And yet there was one person in that house who saw her differently. Jake. 10 years old, curious-eyed and bursting with energy, Daniel's son gravitated to Ebony as though she were a second heartbeat in the house. He would sit on the counter while she cooked, asking endless questions. He would trail behind her with his school books, wanting her to check his math homework. "Ebony, listen to this," he would say, reading a paragraph from his school assignment, his face glowing with excitement. Unlike his father, Jake saw her not as a servant but as family, and Ebony, though she tried to keep boundaries, couldn't help but love the boy. She loved the way he laughed, the way he looked at her as though she were the only person who listened. She loved him because he reminded her of her own little sister, and because she saw in him the innocence that the world so often tried to crush. What Daniel didn't know, what no one in the house knew, was that Ebony carried a hidden strength. Years before, when the weight of stress and anger threatened to drown her, she had joined a free self-defense class offered by a church in her neighborhood. What began as a way to release tension became something more. She trained for years, learning not just how to fight, but how to stay calm under pressure. Her instructor, a retired Marine, had once told her, "The strongest weapon isn't your fist, it's your will to protect what matters." She kept that part of her life private. It was hers alone, something that gave her confidence in a world that often tried to strip it away. But under Daniel's roof, that confidence was tested daily. There were mornings when he would walk into the kitchen and sneer at her presence. "Move faster, Ebony." Do you think breakfast makes itself? There were evenings when she overheard his calls, boasting to partners about how hard he worked while dismissing those beneath him. She knew he was talking about people like her, people who scrubbed his floors, washed his dishes, ironed his suits. One afternoon, as she was dusting the grand staircase, Daniel walked by and paused. "You missed a spot." Ebony stopped, looked at the spotless railing, and swallowed hard. "Yes, sir," she said. Daniel smirked and kept walking. It was like this every day, a rhythm of silent endurance. Ebony bore it not because she was weak, but because she had no choice. Rent was due. Her mother's medical treatments weren't free. Her younger sister needed books for school. Pride didn't pay bills. Survival did. But sometimes, when she was alone in her small bedroom in the servants' wing, she let herself feel it. The sting of his words, the ache of being treated like she was less than human. She would close her eyes, breathe deep, and remind herself, this is temporary. One day, things will change. Jake, in his innocence, never saw the divide between them. He would often defend her in his childish way. "Dad, Ebony makes the best pancakes," Jake once said over breakfast. "Better than the cook at that hotel you like." Daniel snorted. "She's a maid, Jake." "Don't start putting her on a pedestal," Jake frowned. "She's my friend." Those words made Daniel's jaw tighten, but Ebony only smiled faintly, pouring syrup onto the boy's plate. Her heart warmed at his loyalty, though she knew better than to say anything. To Daniel, she was invisible until she made a mistake. To Jake, she was essential. That fragile bond, a boy's trust and a woman's quiet devotion, would soon be tested in a way none of them could imagine. Because outside the mansion walls, someone was watching. The Walcott mansion had a rhythm, a pattern so ingrained it seemed almost mechanical. Every morning, Daniel locked himself in his office, stacks of contracts and glowing screens filling his world. Jake, once dropped off from school, would scatter his backpack across the living room couch and work reluctantly through his homework. And Ebony, always Ebony, moved silently through the rooms, straightening, polishing, keeping the household intact while swallowing the sting of Daniel's occasional sharp remarks. On the surface, the house looked like any fortress of wealth. The marble floors shone, the crystal chandeliers glimmered, and security cameras winked discreetly from their corners, but routines create weaknesses. Patterns invite danger, and somewhere in the shadows beyond the manicured hedges, danger had already set its eyes on the house. Victor Crawford had been watching the property for weeks. A tall, gaunt man in his mid-30s, his face was etched with the hardness of years spent inside prison walls. He had once been a thief, a man who believed money could erase his failures. Time behind bars hadn't changed him. It had sharpened him. Now, free but broke, he was desperate. Desperation, he knew, made people reckless. But Victor wasn't reckless. He was patient. Each evening, while the neighborhood grew quiet, he parked his battered sedan a block away and walked the perimeter of the estate. He noted the shifts of the security guards, the flicker of lights in Daniel's office window, the exact moment when Jake's school bus arrived. He found the blind spots in the camera system, angles left uncovered, corners hidden by hedges. He memorized it all. Daniel Walcott, he decided, was the perfect target. Not because Daniel was rich, there were plenty of rich men in Chicago, but because Daniel was careless. He believed his walls and cameras made him untouchable. He didn't understand that the strongest fortress is still vulnerable when someone inside becomes the prize. Victor's plan was simple: take the boy, vanish, demand a ransom. He didn't care about the morality. To him, Jake was not a child, but leverage. That afternoon, the mansion felt unusually still. Rain clouds gathered above, pressing a grayness against the tall windows. Daniel was in his office, barking into a headset about a contract in Detroit. His voice carried down the hall, clipped and impatient. Jake sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room, his math workbook open but mostly ignored. His pencil tapped against the page as he stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. Ebony, in the kitchen, wiped down the counters. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was restless. All day, a strange unease had been growing inside her. At first, she told herself it was nothing: fatigue, stress, maybe the dark weather weighing on her mood. But the feeling didn't leave. She paused, her cloth resting against the countertop, and glanced toward the wide glass doors leading to the backyard. The hedges shifted in the breeze. For a moment, she thought she saw movement deeper in the yard, near the trees, but when she blinked, nothing was there. "Just the wind," she whispered to herself. Yet her chest tightened. Years of self-defense training had honed more than her body. They had sharpened her instincts. And right now, her instincts screamed that something was off. Outside, crouched among the trees, Victor lifted his binoculars. Through the glass, he saw the boy, alone, distracted. Perfect. He noted the exact position of the back window that Ebony had just left ajar while cleaning earlier. Opportunity always arrived in small details. He pulled his mask from his pocket, his gloved fingers tightening around it. Tonight was the night. No more watching, no more waiting. Inside, Ebony forced herself to keep moving. She stacked dishes, wiped the last smudges from the sink, but her ears strained for every sound. The creak of the old house, the hum of the refrigerator, and something else, something faint and irregular that made her skin prickle. She turned her head toward the hall. Silence. Then Jake's voice broke it. "Ebony! Can you help me with this problem?" She exhaled and smiled, masking the storm in her chest. "Of course, baby. I'll be right there." As she stepped toward the living room, she couldn't shake the chill sliding down her spine. The house was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that doesn't last. The sound was so small it could have been the house settling, just a whisper of wood and metal as the back window eased upward. But Ebony heard it. Her feet stopped mid-step, her breath held. Beyond the living room, Jake bent over his workbook, pencil tapping a lazy rhythm. In the office down the corridor, Daniel's voice rose and fell behind a closed door. Words like deadline and liability, flattening into meaningless noise. Another sound, a careful slide of rubber against tile, like a shoe that refused to squeak. Ebony's pulse sharpened. She drifted a half-step back into the kitchen's shadow, eyes narrowing toward the glass doors that gave onto the yard. Between the swaying reflections of gray clouds and hydrangea blooms, a deeper darkness detached itself and moved along the baseboards. Slow, deliberate, certain. A man in a black hoodie and mask. He didn't look around, he didn't hesitate. He knew the room. Ebony's mind split cleanly into two tracks. One inhaled the terror, tasted its copper edge, felt how all the old humiliation seemed suddenly trivial compared to this. The other track went still. Details locked into place. The intruder's center of gravity low, weight on the balls of his feet, his left hand loose, his right hand stiff with the shape of a hidden blade. "Ebony," Jake called without turning. "You comin'?" She opened her mouth to answer, and the man crossed the last stretch in 4 silent strides. He was on the boy before the word could leave her lips. A gloved hand clamped Jake's shoulder, yanking him upright so hard the pencil clattered across the coffee table. Jake's gasp sliced the room. The intruder's left arm swung across, pinning the child against his chest, the other hand flashing something dull and wicked from inside the hoodie. "Don't move," the man hissed, voice low and grainy behind the mask. "Nobody screams." Jake's eyes blew wide, searching for her. I'm here," Ebony said, the words steady. She stepped from the kitchen threshold into full view, palms empty, posture small, non-threatening. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She made her face calm anyway. "Please, take a breath. Don't hurt him." The intruder's gaze flicked to her, one quick measurement, then back to the room. Windows, corridors, exits. Calculating. He hauled Jake half a step toward the sliding door he'd used to enter, angling his body so the boy shielded him. The knife glinted now, no longer shy, 4 inches of steel held low along Jake's ribs. "Walk," he ordered, and moved the blade a finger's width. Jake flinched and choked on a sob. "Please," Ebony said again, closer now by the breadth of a rug. Her voice softened. "He's just a kid." "I said walk," the man snapped. His attention slashed back to her, irritation flaring. He hadn't planned for a witness who didn't run. "You stay back. You blink wrong, I cut him. You hear me?" "I hear you," Ebony said. She lifted her hands a little higher, showing emptiness, acceptance. In the corner of her eye, the knife's edge relative to Jake's t-shirt seam, the intruder's weight shifting into his right hip, the small tremor in his forearm that wasn't fear so much as adrenaline. "You don't need to hurt him. Take the money in the kitchen drawer. Take whatever. Just let him go." A humorless snort muffled through the mask. "I don't want your money." His eyes slid toward the patio. For a heartbeat, his focus left her. Ebony moved. Not a lunge. Nothing that would spook him into reflex. Just one quiet glide of the left foot to change the angle. The right hand drifting toward her own chest as though to clasp it. The left hand settling near her waist, fingers loose, shoulders soft. She let her weight melt down her spine until her stance touched the floor through the soles of her shoes. "Look at me," she said. "Please, just look at me." He did. Irritation soured into threat. Back. Off. "You don't want to do this," she said, and the words weren't bargaining anymore. They were an assessment. She saw it clearly now. The gap between his knife and Jake's body, the path of his right wrist if it tried to cut, the tiny fold of fabric where the boy's shirt bunched. Her instructor's voice floated up from the quietest room in her mind. "Open the door that's already there." Her right hand rose, fingers open, a parent's gesture of calm. The movement drew his eyes for half a blink. She stepped. 2 inches forward, 1 inch to the left. Her right hand, now empty and harmless, brushed the narrow space just above the knife hand. Not touching, just near enough to claim the air. Her left foot slid to the outside of his lead foot. She breathed out. Then everything snapped. Her left hand speared under his knife wrist, palm up, catching his forearm in the cradle of thumb and first finger. At the same instant, her right hand cut down like a metronome onto the top of his wrist, slicing the angle to neutral. She didn't fight his strength. She erased it by turning the hinge. The blade's point skimmed harmlessly past Jake's shirt, scraping cloth. Ebony curled her left forearm and pivoted her hips, drawing the knife hand away from the boy's torso and toward her own center where she could control it. The intruder cursed, jerking to reassert force. Ebony stepped deeper along the outside line, shoulder grazing Jake's back, her body slotting into the space between steel and child. She dropped her weight straight down through her knees, tightening the frame, then turned her wrists together as though unscrewing a stubborn jar. The knife clanged on marble. "Run," she breathed, not loud, not frantic, directly into Jake's ear. "Now, baby." Off as Jake bolted, small feet slapping once, twice, then shattering into the corridor. A chair toppled after him. The intruder roared and surged with raw violence at the sudden absence of leverage. Ebony released the captured wrist before he could roll his shoulder and clamp her into a clinch. She stepped behind the momentum he'd offered, guided it past her hip, and snapped an elbow into the side of his ribs. Bone met muscle with a thud that pushed air from him in a wet grunt. He swung wild. She dropped under the arc, felt air stir the crown of her head, and came up inside his reach, palm striking the base of his sternum, not a showy blow, just a precise shove at the diaphragm that taught his lungs a brief lesson in absence. He staggered backward into the coffee table. The glass top shivered. From the corridor, a door flung open, Daniel's voice distant and demanding, a phone clattering to the floor. Ebony didn't look. Looking was how you lost the next half-second. The intruder lunged again, this time low, trying to wrap her legs and drive her backward. She met him in a tight sprawl, hips heavy, weight forward into his shoulders so his grasp slid to nothing. He reached for her waist, fingers clawing for purchase. She threaded an arm through, turned and set the forearm hard across the tendons of his trapped wrist. No pain for pain's sake, only to break the grip. His hand sprang open. He still had strength. He still had anger. He surged to his knees in a violent scramble. Ebony stepped to the side and let him up, on her terms, not his, then snapped a short kick into the meat of his thigh just above the knee. He collapsed sideways with a ragged cry, legs stuttering under him like a broken hinge. "Stay down," she warned, voice flat. Her chest rose and fell with heat, but her hands remained steady, set in that unremarkable ready posture a passerby might mistake for nothing at all. He didn't listen. Pride and panic snarled together. He grabbed for the fallen knife. So she took the knife away for good. 2 steps, and she was on him. Her heel pinned his hand. Her knee slid across his triceps to isolate the arm. He tried to roll. She rode the motion, light where he was heavy, and dragged the blade free with her toes. The knife skittered across the floor, skidding under the far side of the couch. He bucked again, feral with the knowledge that he was losing, shoving upward with his hips to throw her off. Ebony shifted with the wave, let it crest under her, and then poured her weight down through her palm into the notch where his jaw met his ear. Not a strike. Pressure, firm and focused, the kind that turns fury into compliance without leaving a mark you can show a judge. "Face down," she said. "Now!" He clawed for her wrist. She rotated her forearm and slipped free, the motion old as water, then poured the same pressure into the back of his shoulder. The joint whispered its objection. A harsh breath ripped from him. He flattened. "Hands behind your back." He hesitated. She leaned her weight a fraction deeper into the shoulder. The tendons in his neck jumped. He hissed and obeyed. The house rang with footsteps and voices, Jake's ragged sobs, Daniel's shout snapping into the doorway like a gunshot. Ebony didn't look up. She gathered the intruder's wrists in one hand and folded them into a simple control that piggybacked his own bones against him. No heroics, no flourish, just pressure and geometry. "Don't move," she told him, and believed it. "Jake," Daniel's voice cracked. "Jake, where are you?" His feet pounded into the living room and stopped dead. There was a vacuum silence, the kind that follows a sudden drop, and then his breath came back in a sharp, disbelieving sound. "What?" "Call 911, Ebony said without turning. "The knife's under the couch." He came in through the back. Jake collided with his father's waist, burying his face as the first sob escaped in earnest. Daniel's hand, trembling, closed over his son's head. I've got you, then, hoarse. Did he? He's okay, Ebony said. She kept the intruder's wrists stacked, her knee anchored between shoulder blades, her weight patient. He's scared. That's all. The man under her tried one more squirm of defiance. She breathed out and adjusted the angle of her grip. The movement was nothing to watch and impossible to ignore. He settled. Sirens hadn't begun yet. The air held that bruised stillness before a storm breaks into sound. Daniel swallowed hard. I'm calling, he said, yanking his phone from his pocket with a clatter. His thumb missed the screen twice before finding it. Words tumbled out of him. address, intruder, knife, child, and then he was lowering the phone, eyes still fixed on the scene at his feet as though any blink might change it. Jake's sobs thinned to hiccups. He wiped his face on Daniel's shirt and looked up, eyes red and shining. "Ebony?" "I'm here," she said again, the same steady note as before, as if those two words could stitch the room back together. He nodded, as if that were proof enough. The intruder breathed in shallow, hateful pulls beneath her. Daniel's gaze flicked to the couch, to the edge of the blade glinting in shadow, to Ebony's hands, to the man's pinned arms. His face shifted. Shock, horror, something that looked like shame, then froze into a strained blankness that had protected him through 1,000 deals. It didn't protect him here. From somewhere down the block came the faint, rising wail of a siren, far away and getting closer. "Don't move," Ebony said one last time to the intruder, and only then, finally, did she lift her eyes to meet Daniel's. For half a heartbeat, the room held all three of them in a taut geometry. The boy clutched against his father, the masked man pressed to the floor, the woman kneeling between danger and the child. Then the siren swelled, the front door rattled with the force of fists and voices announcing police, and the moment shattered into motion. The red and blue lights washed across the mansion's marble walls, turning them into something unreal, like a stage set. Uniformed officers filled the living room, their radios crackling, their boots squeaking on the polished floors. The intruder, Victor Crawford, was hauled up from the ground, wrists cuffed behind his back, curses muffled under his breath as he was shoved toward the waiting patrol car. The knife, retrieved from under the couch, was sealed in a plastic evidence bag. Daniel stood frozen near the fireplace, one hand gripping Jake's shoulder so tightly the boy winced. The other hand hung slack at his side, trembling. He had barked into the phone during the chaos, had shouted at the police to hurry, but now that the danger was gone, his voice had deserted him. Ebony remained where she was, kneeling on the floor beside the scattered homework pages and shattered calm. Her chest still rose and fell sharply, the residue of adrenaline refusing to leave. She could feel the sting in her ribs where Victor's fist had landed, the ache in her forearm from the struggle. Yet her hands were steady. She had held the line. When the last officer stepped outside, the house went quiet again. Just the three of them remained: Daniel, Jake, and Ebony. Daniel looked at her for the first time not as a servant, not as someone to order around, but as the woman who had stood between his son and a blade. His mouth opened, then closed, as though words had to fight through a lifetime of arrogance before they could emerge. Jake pulled free from his father's grasp and ran to Ebony, wrapping his small arms around her waist. His face pressed into her apron, muffled sobs soaking through the fabric. She bent down, smoothing his hair, whispering softly, "You're safe now, baby. It's over. I've got you." Daniel watched, unable to breathe. Shame weighed on him heavier than the fear that had gripped him when he first saw the masked man. For years he had treated her as less than human, a fixture in his house, someone to scold, someone to dismiss. And yet, when it mattered, she had done what he could not. She had saved his son. The truth gutted him. Slowly, Daniel stepped forward. His knees gave before his pride could stop them. He sank down onto the marble floor, right there, among the pencil shavings and crumpled worksheets, his head bowed. His voice for once was stripped of its iron edge. "Forgive me," he whispered. Ebony's eyes widened. She had endured countless sharp words, countless looks of disdain, and never, not once, had she imagined this man kneeling before her. For a moment she could only stare, one hand still holding Jake, the other braced against the floor. "I was blind," Daniel continued, his voice breaking. I treated you like you were nothing, but tonight you proved you're the reason my son is alive. You risked your life for him when I—" His throat closed, strangling the confession. He forced the words through anyway. "When I didn't even hear him cry." Jake turned, startled by the sight of his father kneeling, tears edging his voice. "Dad." Daniel reached out, not to the boy, but to Ebony. His hand hovered, hesitant, uncharacteristically unsure. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I beg it anyway." For a long moment, Ebony said nothing. Her face held no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep weariness, and beneath it, strength. She thought of all the times she had swallowed her pain, all the insults she had let slide because survival demanded silence. She thought of her mother, of her little sister, of every door that had been slammed in her face. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm, even. "I forgave you long before tonight, Mr. Walcott. Not because you deserved it, because hate would have broken me, but I didn't save Jake for you. I saved him because he's a child I love like my own." Her words landed heavier than any rebuke. Daniel lowered his head further, shame flooding him. Jake reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. "She's my family, Dad." "I told you that." Ebony looked down at him, her expression softening. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll always be here for you." Daniel's pride, the fortress he had built brick by brick over decades, cracked under the weight of that truth. He stayed on his knees, not because he chose to, but because he couldn't stand against the knowledge that this woman, the one he had belittled, had shown more courage, more humanity than he ever had. And in that silence, in that broken moment, the hierarchy of the Walcott mansion shifted forever. The days after the break-in blurred into something surreal for the Walcott household. The mansion, once only a symbol of Daniel's wealth and pride, carried the echo of that night. Shattered pencils, Jake's tears, the metallic ring of a knife striking marble. Yet, amid the fear and shame, something new had taken root. Daniel moved through his home differently now. The sharp edge in his voice dulled. The constant criticism that once filled the air fell silent. Where he used to pass Ebony without a glance, now his eyes lingered. Sometimes with guilt, sometimes with respect, always with the memory of her standing between his son and danger. For Ebony, the shift felt strange. She had spent 2 years surviving under his cold words, convincing herself to endure. Now, Daniel spoke to her in a voice she had never heard before, quiet, almost careful. At first, she didn't trust it, but Jake did. The boy noticed every detail. "She's not just the maid anymore, Dad," Jake declared one morning, sliding into his seat at the breakfast table. "She's family." Daniel didn't argue. He only nodded, the admission pressing heavier than any deal he had signed in his life. The change came formally a week later. Ebony was called into Daniel's office, a room she had cleaned countless times but never been invited to sit in. The mahogany desk, the framed contracts on the wall, the polished brass lamp, it all gleamed with the wealth she'd been reminded was not hers. But today, Daniel stood instead of sitting. His posture was awkward, his hands clasped behind his back like a schoolboy about to confess. "Ebony," he began, his voice low, "I need you to know that I will never forget what you did for Jake. For me. You didn't just protect my son, you showed me what family truly means." She opened her mouth, but he lifted a hand gently. "Please, let me finish. I can't undo the way I treated you. I can only change what I do from here." He drew a long breath. "From this day forward, you're not just the maid of this house. You'll manage it. You'll have authority over staff, security, everything. And more than that, you will always have a home here." Her throat tightened. For years, she had lived paycheck to paycheck, counting every dollar, worrying about rent, medicine, food for her sister. Now, this man, who once sneered at her existence, was offering stability she had never dreamed of. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Daniel's eyes softened. "Say you'll stay. Jake and we need you. More than I ever admitted." Tears pricked her eyes, but she held them back. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll stay. For Jake." And for the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her shift, not with fear, but with hope. Life inside the mansion transformed. Where Daniel once barked commands, he now asked. Where Ebony once moved silently, she now gave instructions with quiet authority, and the household staff respected her for it. Jake clung to her side more than ever, proudly introducing her to his friends as Aunt Ebony. Evenings changed, too. Instead of closing himself in the office, Daniel sometimes joined them in the living room, listening as Ebony helped Jake with homework, watching the boys' laughter fill the room. He realized what had been missing all these years wasn't another contract, another zero in his bank account, but something far simpler: connection. For Ebony, it wasn't easy to forget the past, but she carried no bitterness. Her strength came not from revenge, but from the quiet certainty that love, even when it is undeserved, can transform. One night, months later, the three of them sat together in the very room where everything had changed. The glass coffee table was gone, replaced by a softer rug where Jake sprawled with his school books. The scars of that night had been wiped clean, but its lessons lingered in every breath. "Dad," Jake asked suddenly, looking up, "do you remember when you said Ebony was just staff?" Daniel stiffened, shame flashing across his face. "Yes, son." I remember Jake grinned and leaned against Ebony. "You were wrong. She's the reason we're safe. She's family." Daniel's gaze found hers. For a long moment he held it, then he nodded. "You're right, Jake. She's family." His voice carried no hesitation this time, no pride to cover the truth. Ebony felt Jake's small hand slide into hers. For the first time in her life, she truly believed those words. The mansion was no longer just Daniel Walcott's house. It was their home, not built on contracts or money, but on courage, forgiveness, and love strong enough to bridge every divide. And in that quiet truth, Ebony discovered what her old instructor had once told her. The greatest strength isn't in fists or fear, it's in the heart willing to protect. True heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear aprons, and sometimes they rebuild families one act of courage at a time. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your voice keeps our family growing every day.